Our story begins in late 1942, when whispers and rumours started to spread across Germany like a chilling wind. People heard that the mighty Red Army had encircled General Paulus's Sixth Army in the frozen hell of Stalingrad. For a nation that had grown used to tales of triumphant victories by their soldiers, this was a bitter pill to swallow. It was hard for ordinary Germans to accept that the largest formation in the Wehrmacht, their proud military machine, was on the brink of total doom. Joseph Goebbels, the master of Nazi propaganda, tried to rally the spirits with announcements of a German Christmas marked by austerity and unyielding ideological resolve. But fast forward 2 years, and by Christmas 1944, the people of Berlin had precious little left to celebrate. The once grand capital had been pounded into rubble by relentless Allied bombing raids. Exhaustion hung over the city like a shroud, with scarce food rations leaving bellies empty and nerves frayed. What had started as innocent dark jokes among the populace had twisted into something far more macabre, a grim humour born of despair. One popular quip circulating in the shelters went like this: "Be practical this holiday season and give a coffin as a gift." On the walls of collapsed buildings, survivors scrawled desperate messages to relatives, letting them know they had fled elsewhere in search of safety. Looming over these ruins were stark notices from the Nazi Party, warning that any looters caught would face immediate death as punishment. The bombings came so frequently that Berliners found themselves spending more hours huddled in basements and air raid shelters than in their own beds. These shelters, dimly lit with eerie blue lights to conserve power, felt claustrophobic and suffocating. People crammed together, bundled in their warmest clothes against the winter chill, clutching small cardboard suitcases packed with meagre sandwiches and thermoses of weak tea or coffee. The ceilings were often painted with luminous paint, a faint glow that would guide them if the lights failed completely during a raid. But Berlin, with its swollen population of over 3 million souls, simply did not have enough shelters to go around, leading to dangerous overcrowding. The initials LSR, standing for Luftschutzraum or Air Raid Shelter, were bitterly joked about as meaning Learn schnell raus, or learn to get out quickly. Most Berliners had long abandoned the obligatory Hail Hitler greeting. Instead, they muttered Bleibe, meaning survive, a stark reflection of their daily priorities. Fear gripped the city, especially the dread of the invaders advancing from the east. Goebbels' propaganda machine hammered home tales of atrocities in places like Nemmersdorf, where Red Army troops had allegedly raped and murdered hundreds of innocent inhabitants. This stoked an immense terror among the populace, as the arrival of the Soviets seemed not just possible but inevitable. Yet, in December 1944, the Ardennes offensive in the west briefly revived a flicker of morale among the German people. They clung to hopes of wonder weapons that could turn the tide, perhaps even holding the world hostage to Nazi demands. But the High Command knew better. They harboured no such illusions. Staff officers rightly worried that diverting resources to this Western push would fatally weaken the Eastern Front at a critical juncture. Hitler, however, was fixated on reversing the war's fortunes through sheer will, forcing the Allies to sue for peace on his terms. He flatly rejected any diplomatic overtures to the Soviet Union. Goering, ever the sycophant, had warned Hitler of the Red Army's massive build-up for an impending offensive. But the Führer dismissed these intelligence estimates out of hand, convinced that Soviet divisions were depleted and ineffective. Stubbornly, Hitler kept his gaze fixed on the west, ignoring the gathering storm in the east. Then, on January 13, 1945, General Ivan Danilovich Chernyakhovsky unleashed a colossal assault on East Prussia. Before charging forward, Soviet troops were indoctrinated with fiery speeches, told they were storming into the very den of the fascist beast. Though the Germans mounted a remarkable resistance in pockets, by January 24th, Soviet forces stood at the gates of Königsberg, the historic capital of East Prussia. To the south, Marshal Konstantin Rokossovsky's troops launched their own offensive on January 14th, aiming to sever East Prussia from the rest of Germany. On that first fateful night, German General Georg Hans Reinhardt urgently warned Hitler of the dire threat, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. The Soviets caught the defenders off guard, leading to lightning, fast advances that shattered German lines. Gauleiter Erich Koch, the Nazi Party leader overseeing East Prussia, compounded the disaster by refusing to evacuate civilians in time and bungling coordination with the army. In a catastrophic blunder, he dispatched refugee trains straight into areas already under Soviet fire, sowing further chaos. But when the Red Army closed in on his own headquarters, Koch fled like a coward, abandoning the civilians to their fate against the advancing invaders. Desperate to escape, many tried to flee on foot or by cart, but the brutal snowstorms and freezing temperatures turned these journeys into tragedies. In one forsaken village, NKVD agents stumbled upon 100 civilian bodies strewn in the snow, victims of a forced death march. These were women marked with 6 pointed stars sewn onto their clothes, shot at point, blank range in a senseless act of cruelty. As the Red Army pushed onward, reports of widespread violence against civilians emerged, including rampant rape and looting that shocked even hardened observers. Soviet soldiers, viewing Germans as the embodiment of the enemy who had ravaged their homeland, exacted a brutal revenge. Though some commanders attempted to rein in their troops, these efforts had limited success amid the fury of battle. The soldiers were often stunned by the relative wealth and orderliness they encountered in German homes. Neat gardens, stocked pantries, and sturdy furniture, contrasting sharply with the devastation left in the Soviet Union. This disparity fueled jealousy, anger, and destructive impulses. They looted valuables, smashing what they couldn't carry, while political officers and NKVD censors struggled to control the narrative and curb the excesses. The NKVD documented extensive destruction and a massive exodus of German civilians between January and mid-February 1945. Nearly 8.5 million Germans abandoned their homes in terror. The Red Army's incursion into East Prussia spelled the utter obliteration of a region steeped in German culture and history, from medieval castles to centuries-old traditions. Horrors unfolded in every village and town the Soviets traversed, mirroring the atrocities that had scarred Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. For the Soviet soldiers, it was a simple, grim reciprocity. The war had shifted from their soil to the enemy's, and payback was due. As they advanced westward, they passed through lands scorched by retreating German forces, witnessing the remnants of occupation. Burned villages, mass graves, and skeletal survivors. This hardened their resolve to make the Germans suffer for every outrage committed. By late January, Berlin itself descended into pandemonium. Air raid sirens wailed nightly, shattering any semblance of rest. Refugees streaming into the city brought harrowing tales of the Red Army's approach, while Hungary, once a German ally, now aligned with the Soviets, fueling rumours of a collapsing Eastern Front. Railroad workers, privy to troop movements, often knew more about the enemy's progress than the general staff. Many Germans risked severe punishment by tuning into forbidden BBC broadcasts for unfiltered news, desperate for truth amid the propaganda fog. Some harbored hopes that the Soviets would target only officers and SS members, sparing civilians. Public transportation still chugged along sporadically, and people trudged to work despite the chaos, sometimes sleeping near their jobs to avoid the perils of commuting. Berliners braced for the influx of bombed-out relatives and friends, while those with connections schemed to flee the capital. Goebbels decreed that leaving Berlin without permission constituted desertion, punishable by death. SS executions surged under Himmler's orders, targeting deserters and defeatists. On January 23, resistance members tied to the failed July plot against Hitler met their end in grim hangings. Goebbels' empty slogan, "We will win because we must win," fooled no one. Hitler himself was a ghost, rarely seen in public, appearing frail and diminished. Officers visiting the Reich Chancellery were shocked by his transformation. The once charismatic leader now shuffled like an old man, distrustful of all around him. Meanwhile, Marshal Ivan Konev's First Ukrainian Front surged forward, capturing Krakow and Lodz as the German 17th Army retreated to the Oder River. Marshal Georgy Zhukov's First Belarusian Front advanced with equal ferocity toward Berlin. Stalin, ever the strategist, ordered Zhukov to pause and await Rokossovsky's forces, but Zhukov pushed back, arguing against delay. His troops swept through Poland, encountering scant resistance, while Polish units, burning with their own desire for vengeance, treated German civilians with harshness. On February 23, Poznan fell to Soviet tanks, bringing the battle ever closer to Berlin. Soviet forces reached the Oder River, establishing bridgeheads near Kustrin. The Germans, caught off guard by the speed of the advance, scrambled to mount a defense, but it was too late. Weeks turned to days before the Soviet juggernaut would stomp into the Nazi capital. The fall of Berlin unfolded as a city reduced to ashes. On April 20, 1945, Adolf Hitler's 56th birthday was marked not with parades, but with fireworks of a different sort. Shells from the gunners of the First Soviet Belarusian Front. That day, they commenced a relentless bombardment of Berlin, pounding the city until its surrender. 3 days later, a Soviet newspaper triumphantly declared that their soldiers were fighting in the streets of the capital. That same morning, Nazi broadcasts announced Hitler's resolve to remain in Berlin, framing the battle as a pivotal moment for Europe. For the civilians trapped in this maelstrom, ideology meant nothing, survival was everything. One of the largest shelters in Berlin was the massive bunker at Anhalter Bahnhof, adjacent to the main train station. This fortress of steel and concrete featured 3 floors above ground and 2 below, with walls 4.5 meters thick designed to withstand direct hits. But as the siege intensified, conditions inside deteriorated into horror. Up to 12,000 people squeezed into just 600 square meters, a density so extreme that moving to the bathroom became impossible. One woman endured 6 days, perched on the same staircase step, unable to budge. Hygiene collapsed without running water, and drinking water became a precious commodity. A pump outside the station offered a lifeline, but fetching it meant braving artillery fire. Young women near the entrances volunteered, risking death to haul back buckets for the weak and terrified. Morale among German soldiers plummeted. Even the fanatics appeared broken and fearful. Deserters began appearing in civilian clothes, hiding in basements as the front lines crumbled. The impending doom particularly affected the young, with teenage soldiers desperate to experience intimacy before the end. Girls, haunted by fears of rape by Soviet troops, sometimes chose to share those moments with their German peers first. In the dim shelters, chaos bred a frantic surge in sexual activity, a desperate grasp at pleasure amid the apocalypse. A Norwegian journalist observed uniformed boys and girls succumbing to impulses in shadowy corners. Though this glossed over the underlying terror driving the girls' decisions. Another hallmark of the city's unravelling was rampant hoarding and looting. Gerda Peterson, a young secretary, joined a group of women pillaging a Luftwaffe ration cart. When Russian planes strafed the area with machine guns, Gerda dove under the cart for cover, witnessing a woman clutching toilet paper, rolls get cut down. She thought how absurd and tragic it was to die in such a mundane pursuit. When power failed, rumours became the lifeblood of information, spreading like wildfire through the shelters. False hopes of relief columns or miracle weapons. Nazi calls for resistance to the death gave way to Soviet leaflets urging surrender, promising mercy. These proved effective. Many German soldiers clutched them as white flags when captured. Soviet propagandists targeted Berlin's women specifically, assuring safety and urging them to convince soldiers to lay down arms. But Berliners knew better, their fears of a brutal occupation proving all too founded. Desperation peaked, especially among women and youth facing the rape threat. Hopes for a miracle faded into resignation. As Soviet troops closed in from the east and southeast, Berlin's defense fell to General Helmuth Weidling, commanding about 45,000 troops. A mix of Wehrmacht regulars, SS fanatics, and ill-trained Volkssturm militiamen. They faced a staggering 1.5 million Soviet soldiers. The defenders fought with ferocity in places, but the numbers were overwhelming. Hitler, bunkered deep underground, clung to delusions of reversal, issuing scorched earth orders to destroy infrastructure. Bridges, food stores, even flooding subway tunnels where thousands sheltered, drowning civilians in a final act of spite. The city devolved into rubble-strewn battlegrounds, streets littered with corpses as Soviet forces inched forward. Resistance waned among the exhausted Germans. By early May 2nd, Soviet troops seized the Reich Chancellery, hoisting the red banner over the Reichstag. Berlin, the Nazi heart, capitulated, signalling the Third Reich's demise. For Soviet soldiers, this was euphoria. The war won, victory theirs. But celebrations spiraled into anarchy. Discipline evaporated as troops, flushed with success, turned aggressive. Looting and violence erupted, fueled by excessive alcohol. Commissars struggled to contain the drunken horde. Singing, dancing, and binging led to soldiers bursting into apartments, demanding food, booze, and valuables. Some killed occupants even as they surrendered. White flags meant nothing to the enraged, while a few soldiers showed decency, like a sapper unit sharing food with a sick woman. The overall treatment of Berliners was barbaric. Though the war ended, suffering persisted, particularly for women, in a brutal reprisal. The horrors of Berlin's occupation began at the German-Soviet border, where signs urged Red Army soldiers to show no mercy, soldier. You are in Germany. Take revenge on the Hitlerites. With such mandates, it's unsurprising the Soviets unleashed remorseless fury on the population, including vulnerable women, seen as fair game in their vengeance. After Berlin's fall, the first few days were relatively calm as troops pursued fleeing Germans, giving civilians a brief respite. People looted food depots and scavenged fuel with few precautions. But by the fourth day, an unrelenting wave of looting and rape engulfed the city. Soviets assaulted women of all ages, from girls to elders, indifferent to their politics or innocence. Drunkenness amplified the savagery. Soldiers committed acts openly in ruins or streets, sometimes before families. For Berlin's women, this was yet another layer of misery atop lost homes, dead loved ones, refugee flights, injuries, imprisonment, and starving children. Rape wove into their survival narratives in war-torn Germany. An observer remarked how rape had normalized a routine horror. Marguerite Bovary, a journalist, chronicled in her diary on May 8, 1945. I cycled with a dishevelled girl freed after 14 days as a Russian prisoner. She'd been raped but fed well. Usual rapes happened. A neighbour resisting was shot. Mrs. Cross escaped, claiming Russians avoid women with glasses. I wonder if true. Troops were drunk but distinguished young from old. Progress of sorts. Even Jews and anti-fascists emerging from hiding to greet liberators felt betrayed. Inge Duchkran, hidden with her mother, recalled joy at Russian tanks, but a soldier grabbed her, murmuring, "Krom, Frau, come." She fled to her mother, who sighed. So it's true. Their Jewish IDs offered no shield. Soldiers couldn't read them. Soviets didn't hunt solely on streets. They invaded bunkers and basements, raping amid children and men. Some selected victims by preference. Others gang-raped indiscriminately from 70-year-olds to preteens. The first anti-fascist mayor of Charlottenburg noted, at first, Russians looted massively. Individuals, warehouses, homes. Countless daily rapes, escape meant constant hiding. Comprehending the scale is daunting. Rapes in shelters led to more in apartments. Germans flooded local governments with complaints. A police report from Reinickendorf to the Rethor Spandau, forwarded to the Soviet commander, detailed May 6, 1945, at 10:30 a.m. 3 Russians shattered a hallway window, forced a tenant to unlock doors, searched second-floor apartments. Finding 2 young women with a baby. They demanded sex while smoking on the bed. One woman screamed. They threatened with guns. The other called her mother. But a soldier herded her elsewhere, guarding with a machine gun while ransacking suitcases. Meanwhile, the other 2 raped the remaining woman. Extreme violence abounded. A June 28 petition from Berlin, Reinickendorf described May 4, 2 drunk Russians attacked a couple. The 62-year-old wife raped by both 66-year-old husband shot dead. A third arrived, raping her again. She noted her husband wasn't Nazi, requesting a commander hearing. Swiss journalist. Max Schnetzer's diaries from Dahlem depicted horrors. A father defending his little daughter stabbed with a bayonet. Russians queued by dozens for lone women, ignoring their deaths from poison or bleeding. Victims bit and scratched, but were clubbed with rifle butts. Men intervening were shot. Women chased through gardens, streets, rooftops, leaping to death. Soldiers forced mouths open for drink. Yet Schnetzer noted not all Russians condemnable asked about behavior. A colleague said like pigs or angels. In apartments, wild scenes. Women dying from abuse, elsewhere friendly. Testimonies mixed brutality with kindness. A family poised for suicide, after neighbour rapes halted by a compassionate officer, promising protection. Soldiers stopped comrades attacking a girl before her father. A Breslau mayor wrote, "Experience a Russian sharing bread with German kids or driving an elderly woman's cart." But same people ambushed women in cemeteries for robbery and rape. Experts likened Soviets to primitive children. Kind to kids, ruthless otherwise. Peter Ball in Kleinmachnow described Russians as unpredictable, brutal like Huns, innocent like children, calmly shooting, raping yet giving chocolate, admiring rabbits. Junior Sergeant Ratkin recalled, "Of course I remember, a raped German woman naked with a grenade between legs. Ashamed now, not then. Feelings change." Months later, 5 German girls came crying to our battalion. Raped all night, injured, bloody underwear. We lined up, told them identify for execution. They cried, refused more blood, took bread instead. War, of course. Easy to forgive. Seeing intact houses with roses, I want it to hurt, see tears. Impossible to suddenly be kind. Took years. A war paradox, tragic chapter. After bombings and fighting, Berlin women faced hunting by soldiers. To survive, they disguised smearing dirt, ashes on faces, cutting hair short, dressing as men, layering clothes for bulk. Feigning typhus or venereal disease deterred, as soldiers avoided illness. Hiding was common. In basements during patrols. Women sought elderly or child-filled houses, hoping mercy. Foraging, they grouped for safety. Bribery used valuables like watches, jewelry. Food for protection. Negotiation appealed to decency. Communities barricaded, rotated watches for alerts. Some allied with officers for safeguard, often via consensual relations shielding from subordinates. Victims turned manipulators, genuine affection sometimes bloomed. In A Woman in Berlin, the anonymous author post-rapes decided damn it, I need a wolf, an officer. Practiced phrases. Wondered attractiveness despite misery. Felt empowered planning. Women leveraged Russian, speaking or cultural knowledge for report. Deterring violence. Despite tactics, many endured rape, fear pervasive. In Berlin, estimates vary 20,000 to 100,000 1,000. Many multiply assaulted, up to 10,000 deaths. Brutality spanned Germany, 1.9 million women raped. Survival wasn't end. Pregnancies followed. Interior Ministry created special wards for care. In New Cologne, abortion requests surged June 7, 1945, June 17, 1946, 9995 approved for rape. Doctors, some anti-fascist, others ex-Nazi suspended, worked amid ruins. Women submitted affidavits blending need, racial rhetoric. 1. Pregnant from April 27, rape, has illegitimate child, lives with parents, can't bear. Another single, mother dead 15 years, half Jewish father estranged, no way to raise child. Another raped by Mongol, Easter second day, disgust at pregnancy, suicidal risk to kids. Woman with 3 kids 5, Wever9 husband, MIA bombed twice, fled Prussia. Another abused by Mongol to work, resisted, pregnant, can't lose to kids. Legacy venereal diseases. Doctors like Annemarie Durand, Wever tested, aborted into 1946. Abortion spiked, showing violence magnitude. Systems adapted. Rape campaign scarred women profoundly. Testimonies horrify, condemn perpetrators. But why? Complex. Back to 1944. Yanovska Camp, Ukraine, Soviets found shallow graves, fresh corpses, stench, flies. Hands tied, bullet holes, women's hair torn. Survivors testified horrors. Commander Obersturmpf Herr Wilhaus, wife shot prisoners, tossed children for shooting. Delighting daughter crying, daddy again. Propaganda documented. Showed every soldier starving prisoners, corpses. Slogans, kill Germans, avenge. Hatred brewed. Westward, more camps, graves, emaciated compatriots. Girls 16 kidnapped, crying tales. Rage peaked. Entering Prussia. Idyllic villages untouched by war. Contrast to Soviet scorched earth-fueled revenge. Collective punishment, all Germans guilty. Discipline breakdown, rapid advance. Chaos, commanders prioritized objectives, ignored atrocities. Alcohol widespread, lowered inhibitions. Spurred brutality. Trauma years fighting, losses desensitized. Eastern war annihilation, no norms, primal impulses unleashed. Factors intertwined propaganda, experiences, indiscipline, chaos drove behavior. Stalin denied mass rapes, deflecting as propaganda. Portrayed Red Army as liberators, admitting contradicted. Downplayed as retaliation post, Nazi horrors. On ground, efforts, investigations. Victim identifications. Records soldiers raping girl identified, tried, executed deterrent. Some self-punished rapists for unit honor. Morale suffered, ashamed confronted, beat offenders. Victims sought justice bravely. Chaos hindered fear, shame silenced. Patriarchal military disbelieved. Retaliation against confronters. Post-war, order restored Soviet zone. Reports damaging reputation prompted action. Presidium rape 10-15 years labor. Officers enforced discipline, respect Germans. Commanders executed rapists publicly. Propaganda behave honorably. Isolated troops barracks, evacuated villages. Restricted movements. Authorization for homes, penalties. Inconsistent enforcement, some blind eyes, chaos. Curbed alcohol, but availability persisted. Not just Germans. Hungary, Romania allies suffered similarly. Even allies Yugoslavia 1944-45 despite friendship rapes occurred. Lower scale, propaganda. Respect Yugoslavs. Tito complained leading discipline camps, executions. Officers executed subordinates' warnings. Not all punished. Adds complexity not unique to Soviets. Allies 2 Americans post. Normandy raped French, myths of availability. Command justified via social issues, blamed African Americans, harshly prosecuted. Germany rapes during advance, April 1945, 37 convicted. Brutal. Beatings, non-vaginal half-teens, youngest 7, oldest 69. Study 14 Zalozend, Western Europe, mostly Germany, underreported. British less. But power over defeated, justified as willing. French high, Stuttgart hundreds post-occupation. Housed civilians, saw trophies. Little discipline. Blamed colonials, Nazi propaganda exploited racism. Pattern sexual conquest, women spoils, authorities minimized, blamed victims' race. German women endured as war norm, compounding trauma. Soviets motivated revenge, Germans indoctrinated Soviets as Eastern savages. Terrified, hung white flags. Little resistance, men gone, only women, kids, elderly. Hospitals avoided post-rape. Soviet centers rumored traps for Siberia labor. Fear worse than diseases. No organized resistance, exhausted. Regime collapsed. NKVD suppressed via arrests. War myth, imminent Soviet, West war for liberation. Passivity bred. Fear altered routines, no alone night outings. Protections, suicides. Social psychological impact profound. Trauma, shame, guilt, fear, stigma silenced. Isolated, shunned families, communities. Children from rapes stigmatized, abandoned. Families strained, men powerless, failure sense. Trust eroded, suspicion, isolation. National identity. Victimization, guilt, anger, resentment lingered. Today, victims gone. Berlin fall celebrated. But women's testimonies remind war's human cost, enduring pain.